Remember the key principles of video. And because principle starts with a P, let's think of 3 Ps. Number 1, purpose. Training videos purpose that help people learn. So let's focus and always be focused on helping people learn. It's not about having a glitzy production. The second P, I think, was about being polished. And that means really understanding how video works as a visual modality, show, don't tell, and learn different tips and tricks of showing information that can really make things work. And I think the third P would be professionalism. And professionalism is not just looking good in your videos, but also thinking about a consistent workflow. So if I'm kind of suggesting folks think about 3 principles to develop competence, skills, and capabilities in, think about being purpose-focused. It's about training and helping people be better at what they do. And be polished. That means thinking about the visual ways that video helps people learn, and experiment and have fun with it. And finally, be professional. That means learn some of the routines that will save you time in the long run.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are or wherever you're watching. My name is Matt Pierce, host of the Visual Lounge. You've probably been through this before, but we've got a great guest today. This is a returning guest, someone that I've had the privilege to know for quite a long time and talk a lot about with video. And he is an expert, has got some fantastic experience. In fact, I was just watching a video of him, an interview that we did back 11 years ago. So it's incredible to see not only where has video come from and where we're going, but just the knowledge and depth of knowledge that he has. And we're going to jump in with Jonathan Halls in just a second. So let me go ahead and introduce him. Jonathan Halls is an award-winning author and consultant with expertise in media production and talent development. His notable works include creating training videos, professional quality with a cell phone, a #1 new release on Amazon. With experience across 25 countries and a career starting as a talk show host and BBC learning executive, Jonathan now teaches at George Washington University and runs a consulting practice in Washington, D.C. area. His focus blends talent development, learning science, and digital content, enhancing training programs for executives globally. He holds advanced degrees in adult education, and he is a good friend of mine, so please welcome to the Visual Lounge, Jonathan Halls. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey, hi, Matt. You know, when you said 11 years, I'm thinking to myself, I probably had hair back then.
Me too.
And it was probably, well, there you go. And it was probably brown rather than gray.
I had hair on my face and on my head. It was quite something. So, Jonathan, well, I'm so glad that you're here, and it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. I want to just dive into our first question, though, and this is the question we ask everybody. What's a tip that you would give our audience about using video better in their workplace? Anything you got for us?
Yeah, I'd say number 1, whether you're doing learning, whether you're doing marketing, whether you're doing whatever you're doing, remember that video is a show, don't tell modality. That's the number 1 thing that I kind of think is really, really important. So if you're helping somebody understand something really complex, now I'm not talking about a conversation, I'm not talking about an interview or anything else like that. I mean something focused, show it and rely on the pictures to tell your story, because that's what people will actually remember. And video is one of those things that when you've got movement and showing lots of changes and stuff, like what you're doing here, right? You're showing a picture of me and then you're flashing back to you and backwards and forwards. That's what we want to do, to keep things moving and visually interesting on the screen. And that's what actually leads to great video.
Yeah, I love that. And it made me think of something again, because I just watched this review, this video that we did. And one thing you said then that I think is really relevant to what you said is the idea that the camera is the eyes of the learner. You talked about going to a class for learning pizza, and if you're in the back of the room, you couldn't see the consistency of the sauce, and which I thought, well, that's a great concept that I don't know if I hear talked about today, is that think about the camera, wherever it is, whatever angle, whatever position it is the eyes. So great advice.
And I stole that from one of my colleagues at the BBC. And when I say stole it, that's one of the things, the core things they teach people. And when I did the TV directing certificate class, which is it's kind of a fun class to do at the BBC, and everybody lines up wanting to do it to learn how to direct TV. And that's one of the first things they said. Remember, where you put the camera is where you put the viewer. And that's always struck me as being quite profound, actually.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it's one of those things like, oh my gosh, I know we talked about it because I literally it was recorded, but it was a great remembrance to be able to rethink about how that works and what we can do. Well, one of the things I want to talk to you about today is this idea, that videos obviously has become super prevalent. It's in kind of everywhere we go now. There's video. People are using it more than ever. We used to say there's the year of the video. It's the year of the video is past, and now it's just kind of a ubiquitous medium. But I want to talk about, like, I still think there's questions about why you should use video, or maybe it's even better when you should use video. Because we want to talk about provoking learning, but let's answer that question first, though. Like, when do people get that right, and when do they get it wrong with using video?
I think that in my experience, working with a bunch of I'm a consultant, so I work with 35, 40 organizations. So I get to dip into a lot of different organizations. And one of the patterns that I see is people think, oh, video is the key thing of the moment. Let's do everything in video. And so what you do is you line up somebody and do a talking head video for an hour all about tax law or HR policy. And video does not work for detailed content. And this is a thing that is really important to remember. It's the same thing with audio and radio. If you give lots of detailed information, people will forget it. But if it's narrative, you're telling a story, people remember that. If there's emotion involved, so you can see somebody's eyes and their expressions and their body language, people remember that. If you're teaching somebody how to make pizza dough and you can actually show what it's like, the elasticity of that dough when it's ready to actually roll, that will work. And I think in my mind, we need to ask 3 questions. And I'm a learning guy. I'm not a marketing person. So my context is in learning. And when it comes to learning, whether or not I should use video comes down to 3 questions. And I call them the classroom questions. Number 1, if I'm in a classroom, would I talk about this topic? If so, that's a podcast. If I would give a demonstration, show somebody how to change a car tire, roll pizza dough, or change memory in a computer, if I'd show them or do a demo, that's probably going to be video. If I've got a lot of detail, like subclauses or particular facts and figures, people forget that in video, and I would probably not use video for that. I would use written content or an infographic. And people say, well, Jonathan, don't you think video is good for details? And my kind of default is always to think about the weather forecast. If you think about the weather forecast, what do you remember? Do you remember the word-for-word comment of the meteorologist? No, most people don't. There's a few freaks that do, but most people don't. They remember the pictures, the puffy clouds and the smiley sunshines. And the same thing goes with a lot of different content. People will remember what they see when it comes to video. So when do we use video? We use video, and it's powerful when we've got something to show.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful breakdown, because I do see people trying to say, like, oh, this should be video, this should be video, this should be video, or maybe not even stepping into video when it's those demonstrations, like, oh, let's put a piece of paper. And it can all, there's lots of modalities, lots of things that can work. So I think that's a very descriptive breakdown. So Jonathan, in your work, you've been doing video for a long time, and looking at how it can be effective and the ways you can go about creating it. You presented this idea to me of, like, provoking learning. I want to get into that because, first of all, I want to hear from you. What do you think it means to provoke learning? And then how do we go about doing that with this medium that you just talked about? It's not the detailed stuff. It's not just conversational stuff. That's not what it's maybe good for. So what is it? How do we do it? And how do we be successful with it, I guess?
You're in dangerous ground, Matt. You know this. We're talking about learning science here. So
I like to live on the edge.
Living on the edge, yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, I don't think anybody really knows what learning is. That's a provocative statement. And there's so many different definitions and understanding of what learning is that I think that's actually a good thing. And if you look at history, there are many different definitions. And where you define learning comes down to your values, your training, and also your context as well as your purpose. So, for example, your values. I do a lot of train-the-trainer programs focused on learning science for people in organizations. And what I find is people who come from the social work background often come with the value of, I'm here to help the learner. So that's going to drive their understanding of learning. Whereas if I'm working in a bank or an insurance company, very often they've got a business mindset, and it's about, how do I help this person make more money for their organization? So those values and where people come from can really influence what learning is. And the context, university learning is very different to corporate learning. In universities, learning is a core focus. People are there to learn. In organizations, training is very often an afterthought. Quick, I need this help to do something. So we look at it very different. So when it comes to learning, my first step is define workplace learning in context. So we're not talking about learning anywhere else, but we're talking about workplace learning. And I define workplace learning as the intentional process of building skills. That's my definition. And I pull from Malcolm Knowles, I pull from Gagne. Malcolm Knowles, when he talks about acquisition of skills and that sort of thing. And then Gagne, in terms of when he talks about learning is intentional, it's not really an accident. And that doesn't say that there's not accidental. What it's just saying is our job is where we actually help people learn as an intentional process. Now, when people say skills, they say what about knowledge? And so I dip into Bloom and the Bloom committee that said that learning falls into 3 domains: psychomotor, that's thinking skills; affective domain, which is mindset, building mindset; and finally the psychomotor, which is physical skills. So really workplace learning is a process of creating, the intentional process of building skills that could be thinking skills, physical skills, and mindset skills. So based on that, I then kind of figure out, well, how does that happen? And it happens in the brain. It happens not in a PowerPoint slide. It doesn't happen at the front of a classroom. It happens in the learner's brain, and they must intentionally do the work of learning. And so as we look at training, we need to be understanding that it's not about our perfect presentation. It's about how well we get people to actually practice the process of learning. So I'm getting a bit geeky here, but
yeah,
there are different ways to do it. And when we think about learning, it's something that happens in the learner's brain. And the trainer's role is not to deliver a great presentation, but to get the learner to do the physiological work of learning. Physiological in the sense that we're firing neurons. So what does that actually entail? And you can break it down many ways. In the book, and in my former book, Confessions of a Corporate Trainer, which you very kindly wrote a nice endorsement to, but I also use it in there, the learning formula. First, we need to understand the concept if we're helping somebody learn. So if I'm learning, I need to understand what's involved in changing a car tire or rolling pizza dough. Secondly, I need to remember it. No sense understanding if I forget it. So the first process, I've got to build that understanding. Then I've got to build memory retention. And then finally, I've got to apply it in the real. I've got to actually change that car tire on the side of the road or roll that pizza dough in the kitchen. And each of those 3 stages happens in very intentional ways. And we don't have time to get into it, but basically I will draw on cognitive psychology to explain it. But the first stage, building understanding, is where we connect new information. In the case of video, we show stuff and we talk about stuff. We connect new information to existing skills and knowledge in people's brains. And I draw on what we call schema theory. And schema theory is basically that we've got mental models that we create in our brains to make sense of the world. Schemas are like schematic diagrams of knowledge, physical skills, how to do things, procedural knowledge, and the mindsets that guide us, like a customer service mindset or a safety first mindset. So when it comes down to video and provoking learning, I would suggest that we have the most control in video on that first stage, building understanding. But in order for us to help people remember stuff, we have a whole lot less control because people need to practice, and memory retention is built on practicing, doing things over and over again in different ways. And so when it comes to learning, I don't think that we can ensure learning through video. What we can do is we can provoke it. And so if we make good video, that means we grab the learner's attention visually, and through the structure, the narrative, the storytelling, we grab their attention, and hopefully we package it in a way that is familiar so that what we give them can trigger a memory, a schema in their long-term memory to actually connect to, which they then start building the learning. But the learning always happens in the learner's head, not in the video itself. And I've evolved on this. I was a bit fudgy in my first book, Rapid Video for Trainers, back in 2012. And when I look back, I should have been way more specific. And certainly I've become more specific in the latest book. But really, when it comes to video, learning doesn't happen in our video. It happens in the learner's brain. And our video becomes a very powerful tool to trigger that learning, to provoke that learning as we go through. So I know that's kind of a little bit complicated and there's a little bit of geeky stuff in there, but that's what I think about provoking learning. So good videographers in training videos are getting people's attention and provoking the process of learning, which is cognitive processing and firing neurons.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for the. I mean, this is great, right? And I'm guessing there's people who are going to listen to this and say, like, well, I guess I got to go learn about schema theory, and like all this stuff. And I think that's okay, because what I'm taking away from this though is that it's understanding what video is good at and what it really can't do, and so we don't overpromise as in whatever we're doing. If we're learning professionals or if we're marketers or we're YouTube creators, like. We can only promise like, hey, we can provoke, we can get you to have that information that you need. So I think that's really important. The other thing I'm hearing is that there is a role for what good video does. And I think with any job, right? Like if you hire someone to do a job, if they understand what their job is, they can focus on that job. If you have a plumber coming in, you probably don't want your plumber also doing the electrical. Right. And so like, it's not asking, we don't want to ask the video to do stuff that it really can't accomplish. The other thing I took away from this, and I'm just summarizing for myself to make sure I'm processing it here, is that oh gosh, I'm going to lose it now because it was in my head, but like with good video, if people don't watch it, if they don't pay attention to it, if they're not engaged with it, which means something that what we have to craft and create, they don't do that, it doesn't matter. They're not going to move into the other stages and we can't guarantee it. So, you put a video in your learning management system, you put it on YouTube. If they don't really pay attention, learning can't even start to occur.
Well, this actually leads us to an interesting question, one that you and I have pinged back and forward for a decade, right? And that is, do we go for highly polished video, or are we okay with stuff that's not kind of polished and looks like it should be on CNN or Fox? And so I think the reminder is that we can do the best possible video and it may have no impact. And we need to go back and be thinking, not how do we look smart, not how do we look professional and polished and all that, but what's in that video. What's in that video that will actually provoke that learning and that engagement that you're talking about? And so I go back and I kind of like to think, what's our purpose? And in training videos, our purpose is to help people do stuff, not to look like Hollywood, not to look like a network television production, but to help people learn. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be good, but what we should be doing is focusing not on being this cool videographer, but being on a facilitator and being an enabler. And that gives us a little leeway. We don't have to be so spick and span with our videos. If the lighting isn't perfect, that's okay so long as people can see it and they can actually use it. If it's not really smooth flowing like a TV news bulletin, it's okay so long as we've got the shots right to help people do stuff. And I think that leads us into a really interesting realm of where do we stop being professional or not? Do we go for this really extremely polished presentation or this really hokey kind of folksy presentation? And I think the key is so long as people aren't distracted by our technique and they're focused on what we're doing in the content, we're actually doing okay. And that means if there's, and you've heard me say this before, and this is, I think people used to roll their eyes. I say, you can't have a jump cut and all that. And I still think you shouldn't have a jump cut. But you know what? If there's a jump cut and it doesn't stop people from learning and it doesn't distract them, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I'm not talking about those intentional jump cuts. I'm talking about those ones that just happen by mistake. If we're not quite perfect, that's okay. So long as that lack of perfection is not drawing our attention away from the topic that we're trying to help people do. And I think that becomes really important. What's our purpose? We're here to educate. We don't have to look like Hollywood. We don't have to look like network TV.
Yeah, I think what you said there though, it's intentional. Be intentional about the decision that you made, even if it's not perfect or whatever. Like jump cuts, right? Like I feel like I either just wrote something about this or did an interview about this. And in the world of stylistically, there's a whole style out there. That's right. The approach, right?
Mm. And I think at the end of the day, playing around with that stuff is really, really important. But at the end of the day, our job is to play around with the learning if we're doing training videos. Now, if we're in TV, that's a different story. But we're not. We're in training. And that's our core. Well, that's our raison d'etre. That's our reason for being when it comes to training videos.
Yeah. And I think almost that even I think more people are probably less looking at television and Hollywood and more looking at what is happening in the social media space with YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, right? And seeing those. And I do think the one thing that I can confidently say is that because those are not perfect videos, there's a lot of good videos out there. There's some people who are really, they put a lot of production work into it, but
Right.
there's a lot that's not perfect, but it does the job. And I think people are much more accepting of that idea than they were 10 years ago, for sure. Because 10 years ago, people wanted to spend tens of thousands of dollars on their productions, and people still do that, but less so.
And I think that's really interesting, that whole TikTok thing. When you look at the whole kind of production quality and the way lots of very fast shot changes and camera positions and changing the actual shot size and stuff like that, that's actually what makes it engaging. And we're still interested in the quality. And if there's a blurry shot here or there, nobody really notices, I think. So,
Yeah.
you probably never expected to hear me say that, but there you go. Write
Well,
that down.
When you make your first TikTok video, Jonathan, I want to see it. So let me know.
I've been playing around with the idea too, actually. I'm not sure. You know me and social media.
Absolutely. I get it. It's also a rabbit hole that if you go down, it's hard to get out of. Jonathan, I do want to spend some time talking with you about your book, Creating Training Videos and Professional Quality with a Smartphone. And so why don't you give us a high level, like what, if someone picks up the book, what should they be expecting to get out of it?
Yeah. Okay. So the reason we wrote this book was to give someone a quick reference guide, people who need to fill in a few gaps in their knowledge or their skill, and people who want to start out. So in the book, we really, the real focus is the fact that we are about helping people learn. We are not about entertainment, doing news or anything else like that. So the first few chapters are about learning theory. How exciting is that, right? And then we get into video and what makes good video, not in the sense of you have to be, again, like a CNN or a Fox kind of quality network TV video producer, but what are the things that you need to think about to keep people engaged? And then we look at putting together video theory and learning theory. What does that mean for training videos? And how to create training videos intentionally designed to provoke learning, to help people in their job, whether it's performance support, whether it's dropped into an asynchronous e-learning program or part of a virtual experience. So we went and looked at what are the key principles for training videos, and then we get into the practice of making videos. What do we need to do in terms of the equipment and how to edit them? And then finally, how do we put that into the context as a trainer of doing it on a day-to-day basis? And you might remember about 10 years ago, I used to say video is the new flip chart. And I used to say back in the 90s, early 90s, when I did my first Train the Trainer class as an attendee, not teaching it, they taught me how to draw and write on a flip chart, choose the right colors, and turn the page in a way that it didn't distract the learner. Wow, that was our technology. Today, our technology is the video. And so we look at how do we make that part of our production workflow for an instructional designer and a trainer. And one of the big challenges of this book that I struggled with a lot, video is so big. When we talk about video, do I talk about the video that we're doing now, right? Done between Michigan and Leesburg, Virginia, via a browser. Is that the type of video we're talking about? Are we talking about talking heads? Are we talking about animated video? Are we talking about screen capture videos? What are we talking about? And I had to really narrow it down because it's such a broad field, and we could have written 5 different books or a book 5 times that size to do all of them. So what I really focused on is if you've got a smartphone, how can you use that? How can you turn that into a television station in your briefcase, your purse, or your back pocket, pull it out, and actually bring the outside world into your classroom? So in other words, virtual field trips. If you're teaching people how to change a tire on a tractor instead of taking them out onto the farm, you video it and show it in the classroom. Or how do you actually make learning on demand to provide performance support or provide learning embedded in another program? And there's so much we can go into. The big challenge was how do we we rein it back? So I really focused on what do you need to think about on those short videos using your smartphone, but using those principles if you were to go out and start thinking about, say, the difference between performance support and learning, if you're thinking about the difference between informational video and educational video. So it's kind of a starting point, not an end point.
Yeah, well, just as I've gone through the book, and I've not gotten through all of it, but just flipping through and looking at and reading parts and pieces of it, I think the thing that has stood out to me is that, especially if you are coming, maybe you've got professional experience, but you're coming new to the idea of video, or you've not had the opportunity to create learning video, I said all the other side, the social media things you may have done, the dances, the TikToks, the family videos, whatever. I think it lays out really, for me, what I'm impressed with is how it lays out a structure and concepts that make it really clear on what you can do and should do. Like here, I just open up, I'll put it up. This is a terrible way to show this, but like the idea of fonts and contrast and things that, like, I think, if you've been doing this for 10 years, you take for granted the kind of that knowledge of like, oh yeah, we should have, lower thirds that are contrasting against your audience, or, your subject versus, blending in and just making, things that I think become automatic over time. But if you've never done it, it's easy to forget.
And I think that's the challenge for someone like you or me. We've been doing it for so long. You do it instinctively, and you kind of say, if you're talking about a lower third, you think about the font and you just okay, it looks good, and you can't remember how you did it because you've been doing it for so long. And I think it's always a struggle to try and make it as clear cut as possible. So I appreciate you saying that. There's actually a really cool spotlight in there where we look about the future of video too. What's that guy's name? Last time I talked to him, he had hair and a beard. Oh, that's right, Matt Pierce. So I want to say thank you. But I want to say thank you because, we spotlight different innovators and key influencers in the world of video throughout that. People like yourself and Diane Elkins, Gary Lipkowitz from Beyond. But I really appreciated what you brought to the spotlight when we started talking about the future of video, and particularly the understanding of where we've come, because I think understanding that progression really helps set things up for the future. So, thank you for being part of that. You've been part of two of my books because you did an endorsement for the last book. I don't know why I punished you and forced you to read that, but anyway.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to contribute knowledge, and of course, happy to promote it, not just because I'm in the book, but obviously, Jonathan, you're always contributing great information to our field and about video, and I think if you're anyone who is a learning professional who's trying to get better at video, this is a great resource. You can go check it out. Of course, it's on Amazon. I'm sure it's available at ATD Press and wherever else you can find books these days.
I don't want to say thank you too. It's not actually available right now. It's sold out. So I think I went onto Amazon to look at it the other day because I got some emails, people saying, hey, I can't get copies. And you got to wait 3 or 4 weeks. So I don't know what's going on that, but it will come. I know they've printed a lot of copies. So.
Well, I see Jonathan's got, you maybe stockpile them all. They're in a box behind you, right?
Yeah. They're my author copies. You get 10 when you're an author. And that means I can read. I can read 2 at a time. I don't know.
Well, Jonathan, it is always a pleasure to talk with you. We are going to keep things moving here. So we're going to jump into our speed round questions. I'm going to play our quick little stinger here. And for those new to the show, speed round questions, quick answers determined by the roll of dice. So here we go. All right, let's bring up our dice cam, Jonathan. Here we go. We're going to roll the die, and we're going to see what it tells us on our 12-sided die. So question number 5. Ooh, this is a good one. If you could instantly acquire any new skill, what would it be and why? You're a very skilled person. I know you have many skills, so this will be interesting to see what you say.
Yeah, I would like the skill of doing metalwork. Like metalwork, building stuff with metal. I can build stuff with wood, but when it comes to metal and joining and welding, I think that'd be a fun skill to have.
Yeah, think of all the things you could additionally do along with the woodworking. So that would be fun. All right, ready for your next question? Here we go. That's the dots at the lower part, so that's a 9. What's one thing that you are most proud of in your career? You've done a good amount of things. You're a talk show host. For people that don't know, you worked at the BBC. You've taught people all over the world. But what's the one thing you're most proud of?
I think, oh man, you're giving me this is a tough one here. This is a real tough. I have to kind of dig back. You know what? I think from a professional perspective, the proudest moments was actually working at the BBC, because there you're working with some of the top people in the industry, and you think to yourself, you're going there to contribute, and they contribute more to you than you contribute to anybody. And so I'm proud of the time that I got to kind of work in their shadows.
Yeah, I love that answer, because I think it's one of the things I always enjoy talking about with you is the stories, things that you experienced and things you did. So
we're not allowed to talk about those. They're all confidential if they get out.
I know. What happens at the BBC stays at the BBC.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jonathan, I'm going to warn you. Some people have said this is probably the hardest question. I don't think you'll struggle with it, but it's out there. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, past, present, who would it be and why? Anyone you would like to go back and have dinner with?
C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis was a master thinker, and I think that he wouldn't just give me a run for my money, like tenfold, but he'd actually challenge me to think very differently. Yeah,
great answer, and love a good C.S. Lewis book. So I think that's a very wise answer. All right, Jonathan, I always appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to connect with you, they want to learn more from you, where should they look?
LinkedIn is a great place to start. And, we alluded to the anti-social media thing that I've got. I'm more of an introvert, so I have to kind of G myself up to get really out there and engaged. But I am increasing my LinkedIn presence and sharing a whole bunch more stuff. So I'd love folks to connect on LinkedIn. Questions or anything else like that, that'd be fabulous. I'd love to be part of your community and welcome you into my community as well. That would be a real privilege.
Awesome. Love it. So guys, we'll make sure his link to LinkedIn is in the information description so you can go find it easily. Jonathan, we always like to end the show giving kind of a wrap up. So Jonathan Halls, what is your final take?
Well, I would think, remember the key principles of video. And because principle starts with a P, let's think of 3 Ps. Number 1, purpose. Training videos, purpose that help people learn. So let's focus and always be focused on helping people learn. It's not about having a glitzy production. The second P, I think, is about being polished. And that means really understanding how video works as a visual modality, show, don't tell, and learn different tips and tricks of showing information that can really make things work. And I think the third P would be professionalism. And professionalism is not just looking good in your videos, but also thinking about a consistent workflow. So if I'm kind of suggesting folks think about 3 principles to develop competence, skills, and capabilities in, think about being purpose-focused. It's about training and helping people be better at what they do. And be polished. That means thinking about the visual ways that video helps people learn, and experiment and have fun with it. And finally, be professional. That means learn some of the routines that will save you time in the long run.
Well, I love that. And thank you, Jonathan, so much for joining me in the Visual Lounge.
Thanks, Matt. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, you heard Jonathan. Look, you got the 3 Ps. You've got a book that you can go and check out with really great information. Go find Jonathan. You can ask him questions. He is a wealth of knowledge, and we scratched the surface. I mean, you heard how eloquently he spoke about just learning science, tying that to video. So if you're serious about making content, video content that's going to really help people learn, Jonathan is someone you need to follow, someone you need to listen to and read his stuff, because it is really good. Of course, we're always happy to share our knowledge here at the Visual Lounge as well. We appreciate any feedback you got for us. You can always email us at thevisuallounge@techsmith.com. Leave a comment in the social media places so that we can know how we're doing. If you got questions or things you want to hear from us, we're always happy to try to do our best to get to that. And of course, we like to wrap up the show the same way because it's so important to us. The reason we do this is not because we think this is going to help TechSmith be super successful out there and connecting and getting people to buy stuff. We create the Visual Lounge because we want to help you connect with these experts, with people who are knowledge, bring different insights and ideas, because we want you as a creator, whether you're creating YouTube videos, you're making learning content, you're doing documentation, you're doing marketing, whatever it is you're doing, we want you to be better. So we hope that you take a little time to level up every single day. Thanks, everybody.